Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're enjoying these untold Hollywood secrets, please hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking celebrity revelations. Your support means the world to us. Now let's get into this amazing story. It was October 14th, 1992, and the screaming match between Clint Eastwood and Steven Spielberg could be heard 3 sound stages away at Warner Brothers Studios. "You arrogant son of a bitch," Clint's voice echoed through the corridors. "You think you can waltz in here and tell me how to make movies?" Steven's response was just as heated. "Someone needs to tell you. Your ego has gotten so big you can't see past your own reputation." Cast and crew members froze in shock. These were 2 of the most powerful and respected directors in Hollywood, and they were tearing each other apart in front of dozens of witnesses. What had started as a professional disagreement about a single scene had exploded into the most vicious confrontation between A-list directors that anyone had ever witnessed. The friendship that had lasted over 20 years was hanging by a thread, and Hollywood was about to lose one of its most important creative partnerships. Now, let me back up here and explain how these 2 legends went from being close friends and collaborators to bitter enemies locked in a battle that nearly destroyed both of their careers. The friendship between Clint Eastwood and Steven Spielberg began in 1971, when Steven was just a young, unknown director trying to break into Hollywood. At that time, Clint was already a major star, but Steven was still working as an assistant on various productions, hoping to get his first real directing opportunity. They met on the Universal Studios lot, where Steven was working on the TV movie Duel, and Clint was visiting friends. Steven was this eager young kid with a million ideas, Clint recalled years later. "He reminded me of myself when I was trying to break into the business." Clint took Steven under his wing, introducing him to producers, recommending him for projects, and giving him advice about navigating Hollywood politics. "Clint was like a big brother to me," Steven said in a night. "He taught me that talent wasn't enough. You had to be tough and persistent to survive in this business." When Steven got his breakthrough with Jaws in 1975, Clint was one of the first people to congratulate him. When Clint started directing his own films, Steven was always available to offer advice and support. For over 20 years, they had one of the strongest friendships in Hollywood. They socialized together, their families were close, and they frequently consulted each other on professional decisions. But by the early 1990s, cracks were beginning to show in their relationship. Actually, let me tell you about what was really causing tension between them, because the public never understood how deep their problems went. The first major issue was professional jealousy. Steven had become the most commercially successful director in Hollywood history, with Raiders of the Lost Ark and Jurassic Park breaking box office records worldwide. Meanwhile, Clint's films, while critically respected, weren't achieving the same level of commercial success. Clint was feeling left behind, observed entertainment journalist Nikki Fink. Steven was being hailed as the king of Hollywood, while Clint was being treated as a respected veteran from an earlier era. The second issue was creative differences. Steven believed that modern audiences wanted bigger, more spectacular entertainment with cutting-edge special effects and high production values. Clint preferred smaller, more intimate films that focused on character development and storytelling without relying on technical wizardry. They represented 2 completely different philosophies about filmmaking, explained producer Kathleen Kennedy, who worked with both directors. Steven was about innovation and spectacle. Clint was about tradition and authenticity. But the real problem was that they had started criticizing each other's work publicly. In a 1991 interview, Steven made comments about old-school directors who were resistant to change and new technology. While he didn't mention Clint by name, everyone in Hollywood knew who he was talking about. Clint responded a few weeks later by referring to young directors who prioritize flash over substance and think bigger budgets automatically mean better movies. Again, no names were mentioned, but the target was obvious. Their friendship began to deteriorate as these public jabs continued. Don't forget to comment below and let us know what other Hollywood feuds you'd like to hear about. The situation came to a head in 1992, when both directors were asked to participate in a documentary about the Western genre. The project was meant to celebrate the history of Western films and feature interviews with the directors who had kept the genre alive. Both Clint and Steven agreed to participate, thinking it would be a straightforward documentary about their shared love of westerns. But the interview process revealed just how far apart they had grown in their thinking about filmmaking. When asked about the future of Western movies, Steven spoke enthusiastically about using new technology to create more realistic action sequences and spectacular landscapes. "Imagine what we could do with computer graphics." Steven said, "We could create stampedes with thousands of cattle, massive gunfights with hundreds of participants, landscapes that are bigger and more beautiful than anything we could film naturally." Clint's response was completely different. "Westerns aren't about spectacle. They're about human stories set against the backdrop of a harsh landscape. The moment you start relying on special effects instead of good acting and storytelling, you've lost what makes a Western special." The documentary producers, sensing drama, began asking questions that highlighted the differences between the two directors. "Mr. Eastwood," one interviewer asked, "do you think directors like Mr. Spielberg understand what makes a true West?" Clint's response was diplomatic but pointed. "Some directors are more interested in impressing audiences with technical achievements than in telling meaningful stories." Steven was then asked, "Mr. Spielberg, do you think directors like Mr. Eastwood are too stuck in the past to create westerns that appeal to modern audiences?" Steven's answer was more blunt than he probably intended. "Some directors are so committed to doing things the old way that they can't see how much better their films could be with modern technique." When both directors saw the rough cut of the documentary, they realized that their comments had been edited to make their disagreement seem much more personal and hostile than it actually was. But instead of working together to fix the problem, they each blamed the other for making the comments that had created the controversy. Steven felt like Clint had deliberately undermined him, recalled documentary producer David Wolpe. Clint felt like Steven had disrespected everything he had accomplished in his career. The explosion happened when they met to discuss how to handle the documentary situation. The meeting was supposed to be private, held in Clint's office at Malpaso Productions, but it quickly spiraled out of control. Steven came in aggressive, recalled Clint's assistant, who witnessed the beginning of the confrontation. He was angry about the documentary and he wasn't hiding it. "Clint, what the hell were you thinking?" Steven demanded as soon as he walked into the office. "I was thinking about defending the integrity of Western filmmaking," Clint replied calmly. "By attacking me personally." Steven shot back. "I didn't attack you personally. I criticized an approach to filmmaking that I disagree with." "Bullshit," Steven exploded. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You were trying to make me look like some shallow kid who doesn't understand real cinema." That's when Clint's famous temper started to show. "Maybe if the shoe fits," he said quietly. Steven's face went red. "Are you calling me shallow?" "I'm saying that maybe you should focus more on storytelling and less on showing off with fancy technology. And maybe you should focus on making movies that people actually want to see instead of boring arthouse crap that appeals to 12 people and 3 film critics." The conversation was escalating quickly, but neither man seemed able to step back. "Actually, let me tell you what happened next, because this is where their friendship really exploded." "You know what your problem is, Steven," Clint said, standing up from his desk. "You've gotten so successful that you think you're the only director in Hollywood who knows anything." "And you know what your problem is, Clint?" Steven replied, also standing. "You've gotten so old and set in your ways that you think anyone who does things differently is automatically wrong." That's when Clint said the words that would end their friendship for over a decade. "At least I make movies about real people dealing with real problems. You make toys for children and call it art." Steven was speechless for a moment. Then he said something that hit Clint even harder. "At least my movies matter to people. At least they have an impact on the culture. Your movies are just nostalgia for a world that never really existed." The silence that followed was deafening. Both men realized that they had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "Steven, I think you should leave," Clint said quietly. "Yeah, I think I should," Steven replied. As Steven reached the door, he turned back for one final shot. "You know, Clint, 20 years ago you taught me that talent wasn't enough to succeed in Hollywood. Thanks for teaching me that success isn't enough to keep you humble." Steven walked out, leaving Clint alone in his office, staring at the closed door. The aftermath of their confrontation was immediate and devastating for both of their careers. Word of the fight spread through Hollywood within hours, and suddenly everyone in the industry felt like they had to choose sides. Actors who had worked with both directors found themselves being asked which one they supported. Producers were forced to decide whether to work with Clint or Steven, because it became clear that working with one meant you couldn't work with the other. The whole town was divided, recalled entertainment lawyer Jake Bloom. You were either in the Eastwood camp or the Spielberg camp. There was no middle ground. The documentary that had started the whole controversy was quietly shelved, with both directors refusing to allow their interviews to be used. But the damage to their personal relationship was much more severe. They stopped speaking completely. When they encountered each other at industry events, they would pointedly ignore each other or leave if the other person was present. Their mutual friends found themselves unable to socialize with both of them, leading to the fracturing of several Hollywood social circles. It was like a divorce, observed actress Glenn Close, who was friends with both directors. Everyone had to pick sides, and a lot of friendships were casualties. The professional impact was significant for both men. Clint found that some younger actors were reluctant to work with him because they didn't want to be seen as taking sides against Steven. Steven discovered that some veteran actors and crew members were avoiding his projects because they felt loyalty to Clint. But perhaps the most tragic consequence was that both directors lost access to each other's expertise and perspective. They had been each other's best critics and advisors, noted film historian David Thompson. Without that relationship, both of their careers suffered. Clint's films in the mid-1990s were generally less commercially successful than his earlier work. Steven's films during the same period, while financially successful, were criticized by some reviewers as being technically impressive but emotionally cold. You could see the impact of their feud in their work, observed critic Roger Ebert. Clint's films became more insular and stubborn. Steven's became more impersonal and calculating. The reconciliation came in 2005, at the funeral of a mutual friend, producer Robert Evans. Both directors attended the service, and afterward they found themselves standing next to each other during the reception. It was awkward at first, recalled attendee Warren Beatty. Neither one wanted to make the first move. Finally Steven broke the silence. "Clint," he said quietly, "I'm sorry about what I said, about your movies not mattering. That was cruel and it was wrong." Clint looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "I'm sorry too, Steven. What I said about your work being toys for children, that was You've made some beautiful, meaningful films." They shook hands, but it would take several more years for their friendship to fully recover. The first sign of real reconciliation came in 2008, when Steven called Clint to congratulate him on winning the Academy Award for Best Director for $1 Million Baby. "That was a beautiful film," Steven told him. "It reminded me why you're one of the best storytellers in Hollywood." "Thanks, Steven," Clint replied. "That means a lot coming from you." They began talking occasionally after that, sharing advice about projects and catching up on each other's families. In 2010 they appeared together at the American Film Institute's tribute to the Western genre, joking with each other and clearly enjoying each other's company. "It was like watching old friends reconnect," observed AFI President Bob Gaza. "You could see the affection and respect they had for each other." Today their friendship has been fully restored, though both admit that their relationship is different than it was before their fight. "We're more careful with each other now," Clint acknowledged in a recent interview. "We learned that friendship requires constant maintenance and respect." Steven agrees. "Our fight taught me that you can't take relationships for granted, no matter how strong you think they are." Looking back at their explosive confrontation, both directors acknowledged that it was one of the most difficult periods of their professional lives. But they also credit the experience with making them better filmmakers and better friends. "Going through that fight and coming out the other side made our friendship stronger," Steven reflected. "We understand each other better now." The explosive fight between Clint Eastwood and Steven Spielberg serves as a reminder that even the strongest Hollywood friendships can be fragile. It shows how professional pressures, ego, and misunderstandings can destroy relationships that took decades to build. But it also demonstrates that true friendship can survive even the most devastating conflicts, if both people are willing to admit their mistakes and work to repair the damage. The day that almost ended their friendship ultimately made it unbreakable, and Hollywood is better for having both of them back as friends and collaborators. Two legends who learned that respect and humility are more important than being right, and that the best friendships are the ones that can survive the worst fight.